Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. I am your host, Father Matthew Schneider, a priest of the Lead Church of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the Starcast Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we are on day 159 and we are dealing with Optatum Totius number 2. And this is on the need of all of us to foster vocations. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. So yesterday we talked about there needs to be general norms for foreign priests, in particular norms for each country. Today we're going to start getting into those norms. We're going to start with chapter 2, which we're going to cover today and tomorrow, which is on the urgent fostering of priestly vocations. That's going to be today and tomorrow. And today specifically we're going to talk about the need of all to promote vocations for the sake of the whole church, and that vocations are a response to grace. So as noted above, we just have paragraph 2 today, but it has 5 subparagraphs. So we're going to read them in 3 groups. A and B talks about how promoting vocations pertains to each and every member of the church. C is talking about how vocations start with grace, but we need to respond. And then D and E, we need to keep vocations and not restrict it to our own part of the church, right? So that's an important keep promoting vocations, not keep promoting vocations. I forgot that word in there when I did the summary. I'm like, that the summary doesn't make sense. But anyways, let's get straight into the first paragraphs A and B. So let's read them. A, the duty of fostering vocations pertains to the whole Christian community, which should exercise it above all by a fully Christian life. The principal contributors to this are the families, which, animated by the spirit of faith and loved by the sense of duty, become a kind of initial seminary, and the parish in whose rich life the young people take part. Teach that all those who are in any way in charge of the training of boys and young men, especially Catholic associations, should carefully guide the young people entrusted to them so that they will recognize and freely accept a divine vocation. All priests especially are to manifest an apostolic zeal in foster vocations, and to attract the interest of youth to the priesthood, by their own life lived in a humble and industrious manner, and in a happy spirit as well as by mutual priestly charity and fraternal sharing of labor. B. Bishops, on the other hand, are to encourage their flock to promote vocations, and should be concerned with coordinating all the forced united effort to this end. As fathers, moreover, they must assist without stint those whom they have judged to be called to the Lord's work. Right, so these 2 paragraphs, kind of this first sentence, which says, hey, everybody's called to promote vocations. And then it goes through what the different groups within that everybody, right? So this first paragraph saying, hey, we need to promote vocations. Everyone in the whole church, the whole community, right? And how do you live it first? By living a solid Christian life. If I see people living a faithful Christian life, it helps me live a faithful Christian life. And that leaves me more open to a vocation, right? If I'm a young person. Obviously, myself, I already have a vocation. My vocation's already clear, right? And then it's not that we can think sometimes there are those who have miraculous conversions and things like that, and it's great when that happens. But that isn't the way that it usually happens. It usually happens, that people are very involved and then they feel the call within that circumstances, right? I was already the sacristan at the university. I was going several times a week to daily mass, not quite every day, but maybe like 3-4 times a week on average. Before I felt the call, right? And I was praying rosary every day and things like that, right? I wasn't just, nobody. No, there's the promotion of vocations there, right? And then it goes to different groups. Right? It starts with families. How often do we suggest it to the people under our care, to our family members, right? It's very beautiful when you see young people who consider it as an option. Not that everyone who considers it an option is going to have a vocation. Even those who visit the seminary, the majority do not enter the majority, and only a percentage of those who enter get ordained, right? There is that whole discernment process. But that it is an option is very important. It needs to be promoted that way. And how do we live the Christian life at home, right? We don't need to be necessarily the super daily rosy family, the one who shows up every day at daily mass, right? My family was not quite that. My family, we went to mass every Sunday, went to Catholic school. We'd pray before meals. We'd pray a little bit out here and there. But you could really see in the love of my parents and the kind of Christian virtue and things like that. And now I'm a priest and all of my siblings are married, with children, go to mass every Sunday. It's very involved in bringing up their kids Catholic. it's all like when I see new Catholic books, sometimes when I'm out and about, I'm like, hey, have your kids seen this? And I sometimes like pick up books to send to my nieces and nephews, right? Like saint books and things like that, right? So that's the kind of, and my sisters are happy that I do that, right? So anyways, that's the kind of thing you have with a family. And then we talked about teachers, right? Both the teachers in catechism class or CCD, whatever you would call it in your particular parish or diocese, and the ones who are in school, right? Even in secular schools, if there's a lot of Catholic students there, right? To help people be open, right? It's the helping of being open. It's not, nobody can give you a vocation. We're going to talk about the next paragraph, but it's important. This is all about having young people open to a vocation to the priesthood. And I mean, if you're open to the priesthood, usually other people are open to religious life as well. So this kind of applies back to Perfecta Caritatis in that sense. And then priests, right? How do we live zeal? How do we have charity? How do we see, are we happy about vocations coming from all different situations? I've run into priests where I'm like, your way you live your priesthood is not going to attract young people. And priests even have said, like, I don't want people joining the seminary from X or Y or things like that. And that's not the model we should have. I'm happy, whatever your background is. Obviously certain people are not going to be called, and there's a discernment process. If somebody can't pass seminary studies, well, we can't ordain them and things like that, right? But we should be happy for people from whatever background. And then bishops, right? Bishops are still priests, but they also have a coordination role for their diocese. So they have that in addition to what the priests have, because I think all the things that are said about priests also apply to bishops. If I was a bishop, I'd try and do all those things still. So let's move on to paragraph 2c, which on vocation start with grace, but we must respond. Let's read it. The effective union of the whole people of God in fostering vocations is the proper response to the action of divine providence, which confers the fitting gifts on those men divinely chosen to participate in the hierarchical priesthood of Christ and helps them by his grace. Moreover, the same providence charges the legitimate ministers of the Church to call forward and to consecrate with the sign of the Holy Spirit to the worship of God and the service of the Church those candidates whose fitness has been acknowledged and who have sought so great an office with the right intention and full freedom. Right? So this is a vocation, a response to a gift, right? It's not that we can't give someone a vocation. It has to start with God. He calls us forth, right? That is an important thing. So often people think, how are we going to promote vocation? Who are we going to give a vocation to? No, you're not giving a vocation to anyone. The idea of promoting vocation is having people who are open so that some of those who are open will hear a call, right? We don't know which ones. I can tell you that there were people in my friend group at university who I thought were more likely to be called to be a priest than I was, before I felt the call. But the one person I'm first of all thinking about right off the top of my head, married with kids, happily married with kids, goes to mass. One of my sisters ran into him recently at a Catholic event. Great. Like, we were in college. I would have guessed he would have been the priest and not me. And I think most of the friend group would have guessed the same thing. Maybe some of them would have guessed me. I don't know. I never actually asked that question too much, right? But the promotion helps those who are called to recognize the call. And obviously there's that role of the church, right? The church has to see if the candidates are fit, right? I mentioned the one who's, who doesn't have the capacity for doing the studies required for the priesthood. We can't accept that guy to ordination, unfortunately. We need priests who have a certain degree of academic talent. Now, it doesn't have to be like they're all like super A's and everything like that, right? Even going to the seminary, there was very clearly some who were just like, just passing, and others of us, like myself, who were like, striving to get that perfect score for every test, right? And the ones who are striving to pass and pass, that's fine. You don't have to be like the academic superstar to be a priest, right? I'm very happy to be a priest with somebody who got, in Rome, the marks were out of 10 and 77 was a pass, who got, whose average was like 7.5. He just barely passed all his classes. That's fine. No problem. He has that capacity, right? And he probably has skills in other areas that I don't have. I was definitely much closer to a 10. I didn't quite get a 10, but I was pretty close in my overall average. And that's important, right? We need to see the priesthood freely, right? And it's not just academics, there's other factors about, discerning, and also discerning, is this person called to this charism, right? Can he live in a rectory? Can he live in a religious community? Things like that, right? So moving on to paragraphs 2D and E, it's about talking about we need to keep promoting vocations and not to restrict vocations to our part of the church. So really basically D and E separately, but we're going to read them together. So here we go. D. The Sacred Synod commends, first of all, the traditional means of common effort, such as urgent prayer, Christian penance, and a constantly more intensive training of the faithful, by preaching, by catechetical instructions, or by the many media of social communication that will show forth the need, the nature and importance of priestly vocations. The Synod, moreover, orders that the entire pastoral activity of fostering vocations be methodically and coherently planned, and with equal prudence and zeal, fostered by those organizations for promoting vocations, which, in accord with the appropriate pontifical documents, have already been or will be set up in the territory of individual dioceses, regions, or countries. Also, no opportune aids are to be overlooked, which modern psychological and sociological researchers has brought to light. E. The work of fostering vocations should, in a spirit of openness, transcend the limits of individual dioceses, countries, regions, families, and rights. Oh, sorry, it's not regions. Religious families and rights. Look at the need of the universal church and to provide aid, particularly to those regions in which workers for the Lord's vineyard are being requested more urgently. Right? So we have that need to use all those methods, right? That's the first thing. Pray, instruction, living good Christian life, right? We need to pray. It's great when I see, and I go to a parish mass, and at the end of mass, they're all like, prayer for vocations, and they just say a prayer for vocations to everybody, right? And that gives the idea to everybody, hey, this is a normal thing, right? And obviously here it's saying, hey, we also need to renew and look at how we do it, right? In the past, at certain times, in certain cultures, there was kind of an attitude that like, oh, you need somebody from each family, right? And that's not necessarily the case. Some families, even if they're super holy, none of their kids are going to be called to be a priest. And there's some families where there's multiple kids called to be priests or religious in their family. There's no way that we can, foreknow when they're like 3 years old, which kids are going to be called, right? When I was like 10 years old, there's no way my mom would have thought that I was going to be a priest. Like, not at all, right? I was not like the super perfect kid or anything, right? I was the more nerdy side, which knowing me now should not surprise anybody, but I was by no means this like perfect angelic kid. And so that's important. And it talks about the constant renewal. We need to keep renewing. And there's also things like tech, better understanding of psychology. And there's an important thing here about, vocations are for the whole church, not just for this diocese, just for this religious community or things like that, right? I know for myself, I've talked to people and recommended against them during the Legion. I recommended them going to call up a diocese or religious community that's local. The biggest one for me has been, our charism is, hey, we're going to go out and preach the gospel to all the corners of the earth. And they were very focused on like, I want to fix this diocese. I want to fix this area of the world. That's fine. That's perfectly great. But that's going to be a call to be, in a monastery that's right there, or in the diocese that's right there, not to be in a community where you're just like a 99% chance you're going to be sent to other parts of the world. Right? And so that's important. And I know even my own vocation, I was in Calgary, Canada. I'd lived there my whole life up to that point. And I joined the Legion on the other side of North America in the U.S. I know at the time my grandfather, his main difficulty was not that I followed the priestly vocation, but that I went to the States rather than staying in Canada. Because he's like, we need priests here. Why are you going to the States? And he didn't quite understand the vocation to the specific community, but, I'm sure he understands it now, either in purgatory or in heaven, hopefully heaven by now. Anyways, so thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast. You can donate to help StarQuest produce it. Another great podcast at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly to join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue with the next paragraphs of Otatsum Totius, which is paragraph 3 on the need for minor seminaries, which is an important thing that's kind of been lost in the U.S. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information, like playlists, individual documents, and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.